3 days before my sister's wedding, I opened an email meant for someone else, and by the time I finished reading it, I finally understood why my family had started calling me generous. It never felt like a compliment. It felt like a job description quietly assigned to me while I wasn't looking. My name is Teresa Renault, though the people who need something from me have always just called me Tess. I'm a forensic accountant by trade, 14 years now, and it's changed the way I hear a family talk. I don't hear love language anymore. I hear account balances. I married a man named Desmond when I was 26. He restored violins and cellos for a living, the kind of quiet, patient work that made him easy to underestimate and impossible to replace. We had 8 years together before his heart gave out on a Tuesday morning in his workshop, sawdust still settling on the bench. I kept the apron he was wearing. I still have it, folded in the same drawer where I keep things I can't look at and can't throw away. My family runs on a different kind of arithmetic. My father built his contracting business out of nothing, and my mother has run our household like a ledger she's never once let anyone else read. My younger sister, Sasha, was always the entry that got forgiven, the one whose mistakes were quietly absorbed so the family total always came out clean, and I was the other entry, the one who covered the caterer's deposit before anyone asked, who paid off my father's equipment loan the year his business nearly folded, who never kept a tally of what I'd given because I didn't think love was supposed to need one. That email I opened 3 days before Sasha's wedding didn't just confirm what I already suspected. It gave me the exact number, the exact date, and the exact person who'd decided, without my knowledge, that I would be paying for it. Before we dive deeper, let us know in the comments where you're watching from. We'd love to hear from you. And don't forget to hit that subscribe button so you never miss any of our upcoming videos. The email had come from an address I didn't recognize, forwarded into a family group thread by my mother, who I don't think ever checked who she'd copied on it. It contained a wedding budget spreadsheet with a line item already filled in bearing my name and a number most people's stomachs would have dropped at. But what stayed with me longer than the number was a single sentence buried underneath it, something my mother had written to my sister that I don't believe either of them thought I would ever see. Who had actually decided I would be the one paying for the wedding my sister was planning, behind a 5-figure line item carrying my name and no one else's? Why had my father, only weeks earlier, told me my late husband would have wanted his own family taken care of, when Desmond had barely mentioned my parents in the last year of his life? And what, exactly, had Desmond done with our money in the months before he died, quietly and without telling me that my family was about to collide with head-on? To understand why that spreadsheet didn't surprise me as much as it probably should have, you need to understand the family I came from and the marriage I built as something like a shelter from it. My father, Roland Kessler, started his contracting business the year I was born, working out of a truck with more rust than paint, and by the time I was in high school, he'd built it into something respectable, a name people in our part of Richmond recognized when they needed a kitchen redone or a porch rebuilt right. He is, and always has been, a man who measures love in favors rendered. If you help him move something heavy, he tells the story for years. If you don't, he remembers that too. My mother, Vivian, ran our house the way some women run a company, with spreadsheets nobody but her was allowed to see, and a firm, immovable sense of who in the family owed what to whom. I never once saw an actual ledger. I didn't need to. You could feel the accounting in every conversation, in every subtle reminder of what had been done for you and what you therefore owed in return. My younger sister, Sasha, is 5 years behind me, and growing up she was always the entry in that invisible ledger that got quietly forgiven. If she overspent, my parents absorbed it without a word. If she flaked on a commitment, it became a joke instead of a failure. I don't think Sasha ever set out to be spoiled. I think she simply grew up in a house where the accounting was designed, deliberately or not, to always come out clean around her, and never around me. I was the other kind of entry, the one who covered gaps nobody wanted to admit existed. I paid the deposit when the caterer for my own wedding needed it 2 weeks early, because my parents' check hadn't cleared. I quietly paid off my father's equipment loan the year a client stiffed him and the business nearly went under, and I never told Sasha because my mother asked me not to, framed as protecting her from worry. I didn't call any of that a loan. I didn't call it anything. I thought that was simply what it meant to belong to a family. You gave, and someone somewhere kept a private accounting of the giving, even if you never saw the books. I met Desmond at 24, at an estate sale of all places, where he was quietly restoring a water-damaged cello for a widow who couldn't afford a proper luthier, and he wasn't charging her for it. He fixed things nobody else thought were worth saving, instruments and otherwise, and he did it without needing anyone to notice. We married 2 years later. My family liked him well enough, in the distracted way they liked anyone who wasn't currently useful to them. He kept mostly to his workshop, restoring violins and cellos for conservatories and private collectors, and he watched my family's arithmetic from the outside for 8 years with a patience I mistook, at the time, for simple politeness. It wasn't until much later that I understood he'd actually been keeping his own quiet ledger the whole time, one he never showed me, of every unpaid favor, every uneven exchange, every year my family cashed in on my generosity and called it love. In the last 18 months of his life, without a word to me, he met twice with an estate attorney named Mr. Ashworth. I didn't know that yet. I only knew, in the months after Desmond's funeral, that a specific kind of pressure had started building in my family that I hadn't felt in quite the same way before, a pressure that treated my grief as an inconvenient delay before I'd resume my old role as the household's reliable account. Looking back now, I can see that everyone in that family had already decided, long before Sasha ever got engaged, exactly what my role in this wedding would be. I was simply the last person in the house to find out. The pressure arrived first as a phone call 4 months after Desmond's funeral from my mother, and it didn't open with "How are you holding up?" It opened with a number. "The vineyard needs the deposit by the 15th, she said. 42,000 for the whole package. We think it's only right that you're the one who covers it." I asked her, in the flat, careful voice I use with clients who owe money they don't want to admit owing, what exactly made it right. She said, "You have Desmond's insurance money now. You don't need all of it just sitting there." I didn't answer right away. It's a habit from work, not from home, to write down the exact wording the moment someone says something I know I'll need later. I opened the notes app on my phone while she was still talking and typed the date, the time, and her sentence, word for word. "You don't need all of it." 2 days after that call, my father sent a text that read, without a single word of softening, "We raised you to take care of this family. Now's the time to prove it." I took a screenshot and put it in a folder on my phone that I'd already, without quite admitting it to myself, started calling documentation. The following Saturday, Sasha came to my house for the first time since the funeral, not to check on me, but to show me a binder of vineyard photographs and ask, in the same breath as, "How are you doing, really?" whether I preferred the champagne linens or the ivory ones, since apparently I'd be the one paying for either. I sat with that binder open on my lap long after she left, and I didn't cry. I read the fine print on the vineyard's contract instead, a habit I couldn't have turned off if I'd tried, and found the deposit deadline, the cancellation penalty, and the fact that neither of my parents' names appeared anywhere on the paperwork. Only mine, apparently, was expected to. 10 days later, I sat across a walnut desk from Mr. Ashworth, Desmond's estate attorney, a soft-spoken man who chose his words the way Desmond used to choose the grain on a piece of spruce, slowly, and only after considering exactly how it would hold up under pressure. He told me Desmond had amended his trust 18 months before he died. I hadn't known. Desmond hadn't hidden it out of secrecy so much as out of habit. He was a man who quietly repaired what was broken and let you discover afterward that it had needed fixing at all. The amendment moved almost everything: the life insurance, our house, and a small commercial property he'd inherited from his own father into a trust with one condition attached. The funds were designated, in language Mr. Ashworth read aloud twice so I could absorb it, for my continued life and household, and were not to be gifted, loaned, or distributed to extended family without triggering a forfeiture clause that would redirect the remainder to a scholarship fund for young luthiers established in Desmond's name. I asked him to read the clause a third time. I wanted the precise words, not my memory of them. Not to be gifted, loaned, or distributed to extended family. Desmond had built a wall around what was left of our life before he died, and he had never once told me he was laying the bricks. The second discovery in that office cut deeper than the first. Tucked behind the trust documents was a handwritten letter, dated the same day as the amendment. Mr. Ashworth set it in front of me and stepped out of the room to give me privacy I hadn't asked for but badly needed. It was short, 4 sentences. The third one stopped me completely. "I've watched your family treat your generosity like a bill they never intend to pay back. Let this be the year you finally stop covering for people who only remember you exist when they need something." I read it 3 times before I trusted myself to stand up. I didn't call my parents that week, or the week after. I went back to work. I filed the trust paperwork somewhere I could find it quickly, and I waited, because in my line of work, you never act on an incomplete accounting, and I still didn't know the full extent of what my family believed I owed them. I found out faster than I expected. Within 2 weeks of that meeting, the pressure that had been simmering quietly since the first phone call turned into something else entirely, something organized, something that had clearly been planned before I'd even sat down across from Mr. Ashworth's desk. Because what I didn't know yet, sitting in my kitchen that night with Desmond's letter in my hands, was that my parents had already made a call of their own, one to an attorney's office, and one that would bring 4 strangers to their dining room table before the month was out. I didn't know it yet either, but Sasha had stopped asking about linens entirely. She'd started asking my mother, in messages I would only see much later, how quickly you could get a power of attorney overturned if someone refused to cooperate. That question alone told me everything about how far this had already gone before I'd said a single word out loud. What followed over the next 2 weeks was less a conversation than a campaign, and it escalated with an efficiency that told me it had been planned well before I'd ever said no to anyone directly. My mother started a group text titled, simply, "Wedding Budget, Final?" And pinned to the top of it was a spreadsheet Sasha had built with a line item labeled, "Sister's Contribution, $42,000. Already entered as though it were confirmed rather than requested. My father called to mention, almost as an aside, that he'd already told the vineyard's coordinator it was handled. Sasha posted a countdown graphic to her wedding with the caption, "Dream Wedding, thanks to family who actually show up," and tagged me in it, in front of 600 people who had no idea what that tag was quietly demanding of me. Then came the visit. My father arrived unannounced on a Sunday evening and sat down at my kitchen table, the same table where Desmond used to spread sheet music while he worked out fingerings for a customer's request, and told me, without so much as a greeting, that it was family money, not mine alone, and that Desmond would have wanted his own family taken care of. I let that sentence sit in the room longer than was comfortable for either of us. Then I asked him one question. Which family, specifically, had Desmond written into his trust? He didn't have an answer. He changed the subject to the deposit deadline instead, and I let him leave without giving him one either. That same week, while I was going through Desmond's old business accounts to close out a supplier contract, I found something that had nothing to do with my parents at all, and it unsettled me more than anything they'd said. Buried in 11 months of statements were recurring transfers, always on the 14th, always the same modest amount, always to an account labeled only RH. I didn't recognize the initials. I didn't recognize the routing number. For 3 days, I sat with a version of my husband I didn't know how to reconcile with the one I'd buried, a quiet, careful man who I'd always believed kept no secrets from me, apparently sending money every month to someone whose name he'd never once mentioned. Grief has a way of making you doubt every certainty you once had about a person, and for a few days, I let myself imagine the worst versions of who RH might be, a woman my husband had loved quietly on the side, a debt from some chapter of his life he'd never described to me, a mistake so large he'd needed 11 months of careful payments to manage it. I hated how easily my mind went there. I hated more that some small, tired part of me almost wanted it to be true, because a husband who'd betrayed me would have been simpler to be angry at than a family that had never stopped asking for more, even while I was still learning how to breathe through the grief of losing him. I called the number listed on one of the transfer confirmations. It rang 4 times and went to a voicemail with no name attached, just a young woman's voice asking me to leave a message. I didn't. I hung up and sat with the phone in my lap for a long time, aware that I now had 2 separate mysteries running in parallel and no idea yet whether they were connected. I called my own attorney that same week, a sharp, unhurried woman named Ms. Delgado, and asked her to quietly verify something for me before I said another word to my parents. A cousin who has never once been able to keep a piece of information to herself had already mentioned that my parents had retained an attorney, and that the attorney was bringing colleagues to a family dinner my mother had scheduled for the following Thursday, framed as an evening to sort out the wedding logistics as a family, together. Ms. Delgado made a call of her own the next morning and phoned me back within the hour. The firm my parents had hired, she told me, didn't handle litigation. It specialized in family mediation, the kind of firm people hire not to sue someone, but to make a room feel enough like a legal proceeding that the person across the table signs something before they understand what they're signing. I asked her what that meant for me, practically, and she said something I wrote down word for word, the same way I'd written down my mother's. It means they're hoping you walk in grieving and walk out compliant. Don't give them either one. I sat with that advice for a long time that night, turning it over the way I'd turn over a client's file when the numbers almost, but don't quite, add up. I thought about Desmond's letter, still sitting in the folder Mr. Ashworth had given me, and about the fact that my family had never once, in 4 months, asked me how I was actually doing since the funeral. They had asked about deposits. They had asked about linens. Not one of them had asked whether I was sleeping, or whether the workshop still smelled like him, or whether I'd found a way to walk past his empty chair at the kitchen table without stopping. That absence told me more than any spreadsheet could have. In the days before that dinner, the group chat didn't slow down. My mother sent reminders about linen colors, as though the $42,000 were already a settled fact. Sasha sent a photo from a cake tasting with a caption that read, "Can't wait for all of us to celebrate together." Engineered, I suspected, to make refusal feel like it would ruin a memory rather than protect a boundary. I answered none of it. I was too busy waiting on a callback from Miss Delgado and quietly, obsessively, refreshing Desmond's old bank statements for any detail about RH that I might have missed the first 3 times through. The night before the dinner, I sat at that same kitchen table with everything laid out in front of me: the texts, the vineyard contract, the trust summary, Desmond's letter, and the still unsolved folder of RH transfers I'd started keeping separate from the rest, because some instinct told me the 2 mysteries didn't belong in the same pile, even if I couldn't yet say why. I remember thinking that I had spent 30 years being the one who reconciled everyone else's accounts, and that for once, I was going to walk into a room and make sure the numbers were reconciled in my favor, or at least reconciled honestly, for the first time in longer than I could remember. I went to that dinner anyway. I brought a folder. It was thin, deliberately. I walked into my parents' dining room to find the table extended with a card table pushed against the end. 4 strangers, in business casual, already seated, with legal pads and coffee going cold in front of them. My mother introduced them only as people helping us think this through. Though I already knew, from Miss Delgado's call that morning, exactly which firm's letterhead was sitting face up on the table. My father opened with a speech about legacy, about what family is supposed to mean, about how Desmond, and here, he used my husband's name, like a key he genuinely believed would open a door, would be disappointed to watch this family come apart over money. My mother added, in the softened voice she reserves for moments she once witnessed as reasonable, that I'd always been the strong one, which in the dialect our family speaks fluently, means the one expected to absorb whatever the rest of us can't or won't. Sasha said nothing. She sat with her eyes on a swatch of ivory linen still folded in her lap, as if the fabric mattered more than the conversation happening around it. When my father finished, he looked at me the way you look at someone you fully expect to nod along. I asked for the floor instead. They gave it to me, because every person at that table assumed I was about to surrender. I straightened the folder on my lap, and for the first time in months, I felt something closer to steady than afraid. I opened my folder and placed the first item on the table, a printed copy of my mother's text. You don't need all of it. I read the date and time aloud, then slid it across to her without another word, and let the sentence do work no commentary of mine could have improved on. Next came my father's text. We raised you to take care of this family. Now's the time to prove it. I set it beside hers. You sent this 17 days after my husband's funeral, I said, at the same volume I'd used all evening. I want that timeline on record, since there are attorneys in the room. One of the 4 lawyers shifted in his seat. I noted it and kept going. I laid down the vineyard contract next, the one Sasha had left on my coffee table weeks earlier, with the deposit deadline circled beside the blank line where my parents' signatures should have been and weren't. This obligates exactly 1 person at this table, I said, and no one has signed it yet. The temperature of the room was already changing. My mother's face moved from composed to unsettled in the space of about 4 seconds. I placed the 4th document, the trust summary Mr. Ashworth had prepared, redacted only where it concerned matters unrelated to this dispute, and I read the operative clause the way he'd read it to me, slowly, letting every word land. Not to be gifted, loaned, or distributed to extended family, under penalty of forfeiture to a named scholarship fund. My father said that couldn't possibly be legal. One of his own attorneys, unable to stop himself, said quietly that it was in fact an enforceable spendthrift provision, and a well-drafted one. My father looked at him like he'd been paid to say the opposite. The room did what rooms do when they run out of leverage. It got louder. My mother's voice rose first, soft accusations about how I was punishing them for grieving badly. Then Sasha, louder still, said I was hiding behind a dead man's paperwork instead of just helping my own sister. Then my father, loudest of all, used the word lawsuit. which made two of his own attorneys visibly flinch, since it was clear they hadn't been told that was the plan for the evening. I answered every escalation with a quieter sentence than the one before it, until I was speaking just above a whisper, and the whole table had to lean in to hear me, which is its own particular kind of leverage. Into that quiet, I set down the last item, a photocopy of Desmond's letter, the original still safe at home. I read only one line aloud. "Let this be the year you finally stop covering for people who only remember you exist when they need something." Nobody spoke for a long moment. It was my Uncle Gordon, my father's older brother, sitting at the far end of the table, where he'd said almost nothing all evening, who finally broke the silence. "She's right," he said quietly, not looking at either of my parents. "I told you both this day was coming." It wasn't an apology, and I didn't treat it like one. A conscience that shows up 11 years late doesn't get to collect interest on my forgiveness. My father turned on him first, the way people do when the person agreeing with their opponent is someone they can't simply dismiss as an outsider. "Nobody asked you, Gordon." Uncle Gordon didn't raise his voice to match. He just said, evenly, "No, nobody ever does. That's usually the problem in this family." My mother's mouth opened and then closed again, and for the first time all evening, I watched her genuinely search for a next sentence and come up empty. One of the four attorneys quietly began gathering his papers into a neat stack, the particular kind of tidiness people reach for when they've realized the meeting they were paid to attend is no longer the meeting they were told they were attending. Nobody stopped him. Sasha finally looked up from the linen swatch in her lap. "This isn't about you punishing us," she said, her voice thinner than it had been a moment before. "It's about the wedding actually happening," I told her, as gently as I could manage in a room that had stopped being gentle several minutes earlier, that the wedding was never actually at risk. Only my signature on someone else's plan had been. I stood, closed my folder, and left Desmond's letter face up on the table, because I wanted it to be the last thing anyone in that room looked at after I walked out. I said one sentence before I left. "I've spent 30 years being this family's emergency fund. Consider the account closed." I didn't wait for a response. I'd already gotten everything that evening had left to give me. But even as I drove home that night, replaying every line of that dinner, one thread was still hanging loose in the back of my mind, one I hadn't said aloud to a single person in that room. I still didn't know who RH was, or why my husband had been quietly sending them money every month for nearly a year before he died. And 3 days later, going through one last box of Desmond's workshop records, I hadn't had the strength to open until then, I found the answer, and it wasn't anything close to what I'd let myself fear. The box held receipts, tuition invoices, and a folder of correspondence between Desmond and a community arts nonprofit in Norfolk, and it took only a few minutes of reading to understand exactly who RH was. Her name was Rosa Hidalgo, 19 years old, a violin repair apprentice Desmond had met at a trade workshop 2 years before he died, gifted enough with her hands that he'd once told a colleague she'd surpass him within a decade if someone gave her the chance to keep training instead of dropping out to help support her family. The transfers weren't hush money, and they weren't a debt. They were tuition, paid quietly every month to keep her enrolled in an apprenticeship program she couldn't otherwise have afforded, structured through the nonprofit so that neither she nor her family would ever know exactly who was paying for it. Desmond had spent the last year of his life fixing something he'd never once mentioned to me, the same way he'd fixed everything else, quietly, without needing credit, and I had spent 3 days suspecting him of a betrayal that turned out to be the exact opposite of one. I sat on the floor of his workshop with that folder in my lap, and finally let myself cry, the way I hadn't at the funeral, not out of grief this time, but out of something closer to overwhelmed love for a man who'd spent his last months building 2 separate walls I hadn't known about, one to protect me, and one to protect a stranger neither of us had ever met, whose only qualification for his generosity was that she was talented and running out of time to prove it. In the weeks that followed, the practical matters resolved themselves cleanly, the way documents always do, regardless of how loud anyone got in a dining room. Once my parents' attorneys understood the spendthrift provision was airtight and that no lawsuit would survive contact with it, they quietly withdrew from the matter altogether. The $42,000 was never paid, by me, or, as it turned out, by anyone at all in the amount originally planned. Sasha's wedding went forward at a smaller venue with a shorter guest list at a total cost of about $19,000, funded in full by my parents. From money, it became clear they'd had available the entire time. My mother and I speak twice a year now, at holidays, in sentences that stay carefully on the surface. My father and I haven't spoken since that dinner, and I've made my peace with the possibility that this may be permanent, the same way I make peace with any final number in my line of work, by accepting that final means final. Sasha sent one email, 3 months later, that read only, "I hope you're doing okay." I didn't answer it. Some debts don't get forgiven just because the person who owes them finally notices they exist. Uncle Gordon, of everyone, is the one who still calls, mostly about nothing in particular, which has become its own quiet, imperfect form of amends. I found Rosa Hidalgo myself, eventually, through the nonprofit that had managed Desmond's payments, and told her, gently, where her tuition had actually been coming from for the last year of his life. She cried on the phone for a long time before she could speak again. I've since continued what Desmond started, not out of the trust's forfeiture clause, which I let expire quietly, unused, but because I called the program myself and asked how to expand it. There are 2 apprenticeships now, funded every year in Desmond's name, for young luthiers who couldn't otherwise afford the training, and Rosa finished her program 8 months ago with the kind of hands, her instructor told me, that don't come along often. Desmond spent his whole life quietly fixing things nobody else thought were worth saving. It felt right that his name should keep doing that without him. His letter lives in a small frame now, on a shelf beside the apron I never washed. I don't have people over much these days to see it, but I see it every morning while the coffee brews, and it isn't a trophy. It's a reminder that the one person who ever saw the real ledger my family never let me read had already balanced it for me, quietly, before he even knew he was running out of time to. People ask me sometimes, careful the way people always are when they're asking about a family rift, whether I regret how that dinner ended. I tell them the truth. I didn't end anything that night. I simply stopped extending credit on an account that was never going to be repaid. I've come to believe boundaries aren't the end of a relationship at all. They're just the first honest accounting it's ever received. So I'll leave you with the same question I still turn over some mornings with my coffee. How much of what we call family loyalty is really just an unpaid invoice we've been too afraid to finally send? And was Desmond wrong to build a wall around our life without telling me first, even though it turned out to be protecting both me and a stranger he believed in? Or was that secrecy its own quiet kind of betrayal, even coming from someone who loved me? I still go back and forth on that one myself. If any part of this reminded you that quiet people keep the receipts, and that boundaries are allowed even with the people who share your blood, I'd love to hear it in the comments below. Tell me, if you'd been sitting at that dining room table with a thin folder on your lap, would you have opened it the same way I did? Or would you have walked out before it ever got that far? And here's the question I still can't fully settle myself. Was Desmond wrong to protect me the way he did, without ever telling me what he was protecting me from? Or does love sometimes have the right to keep a few secrets, as long as the intention behind them was good? I want to know where you land on that, because some mornings, I land somewhere different than I did the day before. I read every comment, even the ones that disagree with me, because that's usually where the most honest version of this conversation happens. If you've ever been the one in your family who quietly covered the gap nobody else wanted to admit existed, tell me your version below. You are not alone in this, and these comment sections have turned into one of the most honest rooms I know. While you're thinking it over, stay close, because next week I'm bringing you a story about a woman who discovered, 20 years after her own adoption, that the woman she'd been sending a birthday card to every year without fail wasn't the aunt she thought she was at all. And by the time she found out who she really was, it was almost too late to ask the one question that mattered most. If today's story meant something to you, do me a favor and hit that subscribe button, because these stories only keep finding the people who need them if you help me share them. I'll see you in the next one, and I truly hope you'll bring your own story along with you when you come back.